Hey there, environmental science class. All right, welcome back to chapter 10. Now, in our first lesson lecture, we spoke about forest and how we can help to sustain forest and the biodiversity that they provide us. This lecture, we'll talk about grasslands and wetlands, and then we're going to start talking about, in general, just more ways that we can protect, in general, our ecosystem services and our biodiversity on dry land, our terrestrial biodiversity. All right. So first off, how can we manage and sustain grasslands? So methods to sustain the productivity of grasslands: control the numbers and distribution of grazing livestock, and restore degraded grasslands. Okay, so these are some methods we can use. So let's talk about some rangelands or overgrazed. What is a rangeland? A rangeland is an unfenced grassland in temperate or tropical climates that supply forage for animals. All right. In addition, what's a pasture? A pasture is a managed grassland or fenced meadow used for grazing livestock. All right. So you just need to kind of understand these two terms. Rangelands, basically unfenced. Okay. Animals can kind of go wherever they want and forage. Pastures are more managed and they're more fenced in. But again, same thing. They allow livestock to graze. So moderate levels of grazing actually healthy for grasslands. And if you again think about it, way back in the day before we had all these humans on the planet, okay, animals graze, right? That's what many animals do. Okay, buffalo. Okay, here in North America, zebra, obviously, are just some examples over in Africa. Okay, animals graze. So obviously, no, they wouldn't graze if it wasn't good for nature. Okay, so moderate levels of grazing, fine for grasslands. Okay, this is what has been going on for hundreds of thousands of years. Okay, no issues. The problem is humans come into the show and start overgrazing these rangelands and these grasslands. And what happens? That then reduces the grass cover. So when you reduce the grass cover, you compact the soil, which means the soil has less capacity to hold water. That leads then to erosion of the soil by water and wind, and it also promotes invasion of plant species that the cattle won't actually eat. Okay, so again, moderate levels, great. And you're going to learn that. We're learning that in this class. We've been learning that everything in moderation is okay. It's when we start tipping that moderation and going towards the extremes that we end up getting some issues. And again, the same thing with these rangelands. It's okay to have some grazing. When you have too much grazing in an area, that's when you begin to have issues. And so here's what's happening over here. You'll notice a fence, okay? On the left side of the fence, this is what overgrazing leaves you. It leaves you nothing. Okay, if you overgraze, you end up losing the soil. The richness in the soil can't hold water, can't grow more grass, and so you basically end up with just soil that's useless and now is eroding away either by wind or water. On the right side of that fence over in here, this is what you want, okay? There was just some light grazing going on, or moderate grazing, light to moderate on this side of the fence, and you'll notice that we're still good to go, okay? The grasses are still growing, and you're not seeing as much degradation to the right of the fence as you are to the left. And so this is what we talk about, light to moderate grazing here, and this is the results of overgrazing to the left, all right? So we don't want to do that. So how can we manage rangelands more sustainably? Again, a lot of this kind of common sense. Rotational grazing, right? Move the cattle around, all right? Don't have them, make sure they're not grazing in one particular area. Move them a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, grazing a little bit here, and then you're okay. Fence off damaged areas so that they have a chance to, replenish themselves. And something called holistic herd management. Actually, short-term trampling by moving herd helps aerate the soil, so that actually helps increase the nutrient recycling and soil fertility by pressing down decaying grasses into the soil. So again, this is your holistic herd management. Move them around, okay, which is okay. It said moderate grazing is good for grasslands. Again, we can actually aerate the soil. It's when you have them in the same spot herding and hitting the soil with their hooves and their feet in the same spot over and over again that you get that degradation. So basically move them around and you should be good to go, kind of like crop rotation but with animals, but with grazing animals. All right, so that's pretty much, and again, this is what we're looking at. To the left, You have an area that these cattle have been in. It's been completely degraded by the stream, and then on the right, through secondary succession, because again there's still soil left, we don't see bedrock, but through secondary succession, they basically took all the cattle out of here, fenced this area in, and then look what happens after a bunch of years. You have these plants, these trees to grow. This is the same shot, guys, same river here. Moving through here is moving through here. Just here, it's degraded with cattle. Here, they kept the cattle out for a number of years, and you'll notice how everything was replenished through that secondary ecological succession. All right, so this is what we have to do to manage our rangelands more sustainably. All right, we next going to move on to how can we manage and sustain wetlands. All right, well, obviously, wetlands are disappearing, or we wouldn't be talking about it, right? The United States has lost more than half of its coastal and inland wetlands since 1900. Other countries have lost even more, and the rate of loss of wetlands throughout the world is accelerating. So why are they disappearing? Well, for centuries, people have drained, filled in, or covered over swamps, marshes, and other wetlands. Why? Well, to create rice fields and other cropland, to accommodate expanding cities and suburbs with the human population boom, to build roads, to extract minerals, oils, natural gas, to eliminate breeding grounds for insects that cause diseases such as malaria, right? You get rid of the wetlands, you get rid of the mosquitoes. So obviously people have been doing this for centuries for these reasons, all right? And again, on the surface, many of these reasons look okay, but what they end up doing is destroying our wetlands and destroying our biodiversity. Only about 6% of the country's remaining inland wetlands are federally protected, and state and local wetland protection is inconsistent and generally weak. So here's an area where we can help preserve and restore wetlands. Let's get some better state and local wetland protection. Now, private investment bankers actually make money by buying wetland areas and restoring them, or creating new wetlands. This creates banks or credits that the bankers can then sell to developers who then want to develop that wetland. All right. However, it's difficult to restore, enhance, or create wetlands. So again, this system isn't working as well to preserve and to restore wetlands. So a case study we can look at, all right, are the Florida Everglades, or is the Florida Everglades, okay? How can we restore them? To help preserve the Everglades system, in 1947, the U.S. government established Everglades National Park, and we'll talk a little bit more, a little bit down in the lecture here about establishing national parks as a way to help sustain our terrestrial biodiversity. However, this protection effort did not work because of the massive water distribution and land development project to the north. All right, to the north of the Everglades. Much of the original Everglades has been drained, paved over, polluted, or invaded by invasive species. Okay, so unfortunately, much of the Everglades National Park has been degraded. You'll notice the red outline here. This is all what used to be the Everglades. Okay, anywhere in this red outline. So basically down here, all of Miami, all right, just west of West Palm here, or excuse me, Fort Lauderdale, all right, west of West Palm up to Lake Okeechobee. All of this area in here was considered Everglade. Well, now you'll notice just this green is Everglade National Park. This orange here is all urban areas. We do have some water conservation and some agricultural areas, but again, it's not Everglade anymore. Okay, so we've lost a lot of it, and that's because of what was going on up here near Lake Okeechobee and the Kissimmee River. All right, so its biodiversity, though, has been decreasing, mostly because of habitat loss, pollution, and invasive species, just like we talked about. 90% of wading birds in the Everglades National Park are gone, and in addition, vertebrates from deer to turtles are down 75 to 95%. And again, why? Habitat loss, pollution, and the invasive species in the Everglades. You saw the habitat loss, how much smaller it looks like. Invasive species are moving in, and obviously pollution as well. The world's largest ecological restoration project, known as the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, has several ambitious goals. So this is what they're trying to do to help restore the Everglade wetlands. So the restoration of the flow of water from the Kissimmee River, that's out. Okay, that would help as well. Removal of canals and levees that block natural water flow south of Lake Okeechobee. So basically what happened was they decided to block these natural water flows to create some agricultural land, well, that obviously then is drying out the Everglades because you're not getting water from Lake Okeechobee to flow into the Everglades. Conversion of large areas of farmland to marshes. That's what they're trying to do now. Okay. Creation of 18 large reservoirs and underground water storage areas for the lower Everglades and South Florida's population, all right, so that they can get some water there, and build a canal reservoir system for catching the water now flowing out to the sea and actually pumping it back into the Everglades. So these are, again, just some of the ways that they're trying to restore the Florida Everglades through this comprehensive Everglades restoration plan. So again, just have a general idea of some of this, just in case it pops up on an FRQ somewhere down the road. All right, so that's it on wetlands. Now we're going to start talking about, just in general, how can we sustain terrestrial biodiversity and ecosystem services. So a lot of this stuff we've already spoken about in our individual sections on forest and the wetlands and the rangelands. But again, we're going to talk about it now in more detail, in more of a general sense. So first things we can do is establish and protect wilderness parks, right? That's what Costa Rica did. 25% of its land is now some kind of nature preserve or a park. So we need to protect them, establish them, and then protect them. We need to identify and protect biological hotspots. All right, these are highly threatened areas of biodiversity. We need to find them on Earth, and we need to focus our attention on these biological hotspots. We need to protect ecosystem services. We need to restore damaged ecosystems, and we need to share areas that we dominate with other species, because we are not alone on this planet, and we need to start realizing that. So, restoring damaged ecosystems, map the world's terrestrial ecosystems, and create inventory of species. Again, these are, just more ways we can do this. Identify resilient and fragile ecosystems, all right? If you know ones that are resilient, you know ones that are fragile, you can kind of leave the resilient ones alone for now and concentrate on the fragile ones, because you want to protect the most endangered ecosystems and species. Emphasize, or put your emphasis on protecting plant biodiversity, and ecosystem services. Again, restore degraded ecosystems and provide incentives to landowners like they're doing in Costa Rica. Give them money to create more biodiversity on their land. So, again, strategies for sustaining terrestrial biodiversity: protect species from extinction, set aside wilderness areas, establish parks and nature preserves where people can interact with nature, identify and protect biodiversity hotspots. It's more of the same here, guys. All right, shift new development to lands already cleared or degraded, and once again, protect those services. Increase crop productivity on existing crop land. So instead of finding, we'll talk about growing crops more in a few more units, but what you want to do is you want to increase the crop productivity on the crop land you have. Don't go and start creating new cropland. We need to use our brains as humans and our technology, and maybe by some genetic engineering, increase your crop productivity on the cropland that you already have. Rehabilitate and restore partially damaged ecosystems, and again, share areas with other ecosystems. So, talking about one of those, the protecting of the biodiversity hotspots. All right, we have 34 of these biodiversity hotspots have been found around the world. They cover about 2% of Earth's surface, but 50% of flowering plant species and 42% of terrestrial vertebrates, okay, live in this 2% of Earth's surface, in these 34 biodiversity hotspots. 1.2 billion people also live in these biodiversity hotspots, and only 5% of the total area of these hotspots is truly protected. All right, so if you think about those numbers, you can think about how important they are. They only cover 2% of the surface, but almost 50% of flowering plants and over 40% of terrestrial vertebrates live in that 2% of Earth's surface that are in these 34 biodiversity hotspots. So here is basically a picture of where these biodiversity hotspots are located. All right, you'll notice many in Central America and along the west coast of South America. There's Brazil here, biodiversity hotspot. Looks like a little one right in the Appalachian Mountains somewhere, right? A little one right around Central California. Then we have parts of Europe, parts of Africa, parts of Asia, Australia. Again, these are your biodiversity hotspots, the island of Japan, the island of New Zealand. All right. And these are the areas where we really need to focus on because while they're only 2% of the land mass, again, over 50% of flowering plants and over 40% of our vertebrates, terrestrial vertebrates, live in these areas that you see shaded red, these biodiversity hotspots. We also need to establish wilderness areas. So in 1964, all right, the Wilderness Act was created. The U.S. government may set aside undeveloped tracts of public land. Only 5%, however, of U.S. land is protected as wilderness, and more than half of that is in Alaska. So while we do have this 1964 Wilderness Act, it hasn't created a lot of wilderness, all right? Again, only 5% of the land in the U.S. is protected as wilderness, and more than half of it is in Alaska. As the human population and ecological footprint expand, it becomes increasingly difficult to establish new wilderness areas because obviously you have the need for people and a place for them to live. And unfortunately, as the human population is booming, so is the ecological footprint. We could also establish parks and other nature reserves. So more than 6,600 national parks in 120 countries have been established, most too small to sustain large animal species. So again, wilderness is a large expanse. Okay, very, very large. All right, and parks are tinier. Okay, so like, look, Yellowstone's a park; it's huge. Okay, so it doesn't have to be tiny like the park outside here in Ardsley. But that's how it goes. Wilderness are vast areas like Alaska. All right, parks are a little bit smaller, but most are too small to sustain large animal species. Some are so popular that human use is actually degrading the park. So, for instance, I was watching something yesterday. I watched this travel show, Rick Steves Europe. I love, since I had kids, I can't travel as much. I'm hoping to do that in the future. My kids are getting older, but I haven't really gone out of the country in many years, and I love doing it. And he went to the Isle of Skye, which was in northern Scotland. I don't know if anyone's ever been there. I definitely want to go. And basically what it was showing, he was showing the Isle of Skye, but it becomes so popular that he actually showed this one hiking area, and he actually joked that they couldn't find a parking spot because he showed the view down the mountain, and there were these rows of cars just parked all along the parking spot. So the point is, some of these parks have become so popular that the humans are actually degrading the park. I find that actually right across the river in Harriman State Park, where I go hiking. I always joke to my friends, I need to open a Cinnabon on one of the trails because there's so many people on the trails. I can make a fortune selling cinnamon buns. It's just a little joke I make, but the point is, parks are becoming so popular so that human use is actually degrading them. So in a way, these parks aren't really doing what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to get humans and nature to be together, and they are. But unfortunately, so many humans are using it that it's kind of having a negative effect. Parks in less developed countries have the greatest diversity. But they're also subject to illegal poaching, logging, mining, and other uses that obviously degrade the park itself. So here are just some more stresses on U.S. public parks. The U.S. has 59 major national parks, but factors that are degrading the parks, again, popularity, just talked about that. Off-road vehicle use. Off-road vehicle use, ATVs, guys, are horrible, all right, for degrading parks. They rip up the soil. All right, they just not only is it noise pollution, all right, but it also destroys soil. It causes roads. It causes fragmentation of habitats. All right, cell phone towers degrading parks. Not necessarily the tower itself, but the process of building it. Again, you need a road to get in there, right? So you cut down trees to build a road. You start fragmenting your forest. You start fragmenting your parkland. All right, non-native species, invasive species. All right, invading the parks by accident sometimes. Again, humans using them bring things in by accident, and all of a sudden you have this invasive species in the park. Nearby air pollution and traffic, we spoke about that. And overdue maintenance and repairs. Unfortunately, a lot of times money is funneled to other things and not to our national parks where they need to be. That money needs to be funneled for maintenance and repairs. All right, so designing and managing natural reserves. All right, large natural reserves typically sustain more species and provide greater habitat diversity than small reserves. All right. So again, these are just areas. We talk about wilderness areas. We talk about parks. We talk about reserves. All right. Habitat corridor can benefit species, allows migration in response to climate change. Basically, what that is let's say you have two forests that have been fragmented by a road. All right. Well, guess what? Something you can do to manage that is to somehow create some kind of corridor from one forest to the other forest that any creatures that need to migrate can migrate through and can move from one fragmented area to the other. All right, so that's something that we can do as human beings to kind of help migration and to kind of help deal with this fragmentation or the fragmenting of our forest, of our wetlands, of our rangelands, etc. Also, the buffer zone concept. All right, strictly protect inner core of reserve, sustainable resource extraction in the buffer zone. So what this means is, think about a circle, okay? You would have a circle like this, okay? And what you would do is, in the inner circle, all right, something like that, in the inner circle, I don't know if you can see that, all right? In the inner circle would be where you strictly protect, okay, the area in the inner circle of the reserve, and then around that in the buffer zone, that's where you can maybe take some resources out. All right, sustainable resource extraction could be done in that buffer zone, but strictly protect the inner core of the reserve and do not let any human beings get in there with either logging roads or to do any mining or forestry, timber, things like that. Okay, so you want to protect the inner core and then allow a little bit of sustainable resource extraction in that outer core of that buffer zone. And this is called the buffer zone concept. And again, you have that habitat corridor as well. All right, just more ways that you can design and manage these natural reserves. So Science Focus 10.1 talks about reintroducing the gray wolf to Yellowstone National Park. Number of gray wolves declined between 1850 and 1900, basically killed by humans because they were worried that the wolves were going to eat their cattle. Okay, so they killed all these wolves. In 1966, they relocated 41 gray wolves caught in Canada to Yellowstone. In 2014, we now have 104 wolves in Yellowstone National Park. So luckily, we are beginning to see the population of the gray wolf increase again in Yellowstone National Park. And there is a picture of that beautiful creature. All right, last case study we'll look at for this part. All right, identifying, protecting biodiversity in Costa Rica. Again, we spoke about this a little bit at the beginning of the lecture in the previous part 1. Costa Rica protects a larger portion of its land than any other country. Principles of biodiversity. They respect biodiversity and understand the value of sustaining it. They rely less on fossil fuels and more on direct solar energy, so they don't have to go in there and degrade their rainforest to get these fossil fuels. And they place a value on the ecosystem services and help implement full cost pricing. Right? This is what Costa Rica does, and this is why they have been able to protect and why they are a world leader in conservation. Okay, they do place a value. They do use that full cost value. They also created mega reserves in Costa Rica. So these are very, very large conservation areas designed to sustain about 80% of the country's biodiversity. And once again, they protect the inner core, surrounded by 2 buffer zones that local people can use. Right, so just think of a bullseye and a dartboard. I mean, you guys have thrown darts before, right? The bullseye, protected. No one can get in there. Doesn't matter what you try to do, totally protected. And then you have 2 outer rings where local people can use a little bit from outer ring 1, a little bit more in outer ring number 2. And that's how they use this this way, all right, this plan, this core plan to help these mega reserves and to help increase and sustain their biodiversity. And they know it helps them because they have a large ecotourism industry in Costa Rica. That's why my parents went down there twice, all right? And so what they're doing is they're using their beautiful biodiversity to make money, not by clear cutting, not by chopping down trees or selling stuff, by just selling nature. By just not selling it in a sense of giving it to you, but saying, come in, enjoy nature. It's going to cost you money, but you're going to enjoy beautiful biodiversity here in Costa Rica, and they have definitely made it work, and they are definitely succeeding, and once again, a conservation leader here on the globe. And once again, you can kind of see what they're talking about here. All right, national parkland in green, the buffer zone in yellow. So again, the national parklands, you can't get in there. Okay, those are totally protected, but in the buffer zones in the yellow, you can have some human either taking resources or living there, or doing something to the natural environment there in the buffer zone. But again, in the green areas, we are protected, and they don't allow anything to go on there except for what naturally occurs. All right, so we will stop there. All right, there's about 30 slides left, so we will move on. We'll talk about more about protecting ecosystem services in the next part, and we'll also talk about building sustainable cities and how we can do that. But that's also coming up in part 3, so I will see you then.